Okay, so today we're going to be talking about malaria. What is malaria? Slide one. So, malaria is a serious, sometimes fatal disease that is caused by a parasite that's carried from person to person by a mosquito. It originated in gorillas in sub Saharan Africa, and there are four main types of malaria, but we will be focusing on falciparum species. There is also one less common type that is zoonotic, but we won't be talking about that one today. The CDC identified that the World Health Organization estimated 228 million cases worldwide and 405,000 deaths in 2018, and they also estimate that there will be 2,000 cases identified every year in the US. Most of the cases occur in Africa and Asia. So, second slide, microorganism information. It is a protozoa of the genus Plasmodium, and obviously, like we said, there are the four main types. So they are transmitted host to host by the female mosquitoes of the Anopheles species, and the main organism that we'll be talking about is the Plasmodium falciparum. It is the most dangerous and most common and is generally found in sub-Saharan Africa. The second most common is Plasmodium vivax, and it is found in Asia generally. And then the two that are least common that we'll be talking about are Plasmodium ovale and Plasmodium malariae. And while they aren't as common, they can have a dormant stage in the liver when they can cause malaria months to years later.
So the historical significance of malaria is kind of interesting just because everywhere in the world was kind of working on it all at the same time. So I just really tried to highlight the key points of what was happening. So the earliest cases found of malaria were in Chinese documents from around 2700 BC. In 2700 BC, they thought that malaria was caused by miasma, which means bad air. So a lot of people thought that if there was a swamp or something nearby, when the wind would blow the air from above the swamp, that would make them sick. This was all before the germ theory existed, so this is how they thought a lot of diseases spread back then. And then the word malaria actually came from an Italian word which meant spoiled air. In around 1880, Alphonse Laveran found parasites in blood, which actually catapulted further studies of what actually causes malaria. So then in 1887, William McCallan discovered that there were sexual stages of parasites, and he used that knowledge to infect birds with a similar strain to what was causing malaria. To see how the birds would react to that strain. After he did that experiment, a guy named Ronald Ross actually, he figured out how malaria was transmitted, and he found that the vector was a species of female mosquitoes. And then from around 1800 or 1898 to about 1900, there was a group of Italian scientists who were studying malaria in humans. So then, after World War II, the research really intensified because there was a lot of soldiers coming back from the war who had malaria, because we hadn't really seen malaria in the United States yet. So while they were studying the soldiers, they actually found a phase in the liver that preceded the stage in the blood. So they continued to find a ton of new strains, and it took them about 70 years to understand the actual life cycle of malaria. So, the clinical manifestations of malaria, they're kind of common symptoms of every disease, but they're fever, which is the most common, chills, nausea, vomiting, abnormal levels of consciousness, severe anemia, renal failure, and that renal failure will lead to multi-system failure throughout your body. Another symptom of malaria is that you'll go through bouts of illness alternating with symptom-free periods. So there's 3 different stages that you'll go through in about a 6 to 10 hour period, and then it kind of repeats itself every 24 hours. So the first stage can last about 15 to 16 or 60 minutes, and it's the cold stage. So you're basically you have the sensation of being really cold, you're shivering. And then the next stage can last about 2 to 6 hours, and it's the hot stage. You can get a fever up to almost 106 degrees. You'll be flushed, you can have a headache, you can be really nauseous. And then the last stage is about 2 to 4 hours, and it's the sweating stage. And your fever drops rapidly, and you're so tired. Your body's just exhausted from trying to fight off the other 2 stages.
So now for slide 9, when we're talking about the epidemiology. So it's generally it is spread from blood to blood contact, and so that usually occurs through mosquitoes that spread or take blood from the first person that it got blood from to the next person that it's going to get blood from. But it can also be spread through mother to baby, and then also through sharing needles, blood transfusion, which is really rare now because of modernization, and then any introduction of contaminated blood through any other source. And then it can't be transmitted sexually or through any other bodily fluid, just through blood. And then next slide, 10, at-risk populations and prevention/control. So everyone is at risk, everyone can get it, but it's more common in countries with a higher incidence rate because the higher incidence rate means more mosquitoes can pick it up and spread it to more people. And then people who use needles and share needles are more common because they are more introduced to other people's blood. Children of women with malaria because it can be passed through the blood of the placenta. And then people in areas with high population of mosquitoes because the more mosquitoes that are alive, the more mosquitoes that are passing blood from person to person. And then prevention and control, that can be prevented with drugs and shots, but you have to make sure to take them, if you're taking them before you go to an area to prevent the introduction of malaria, you have to take them with enough time before you go so that they're actually effective. And then for ways when you're already there, you can use bug spray and nets to prevent getting bitten. You can use insecticides and other methods to decrease the mosquito population. That way there's less mosquitoes to pass it. And then you can also just look at the CDC map to see where it's more common and what you need to do for that specific area. And then for prevalence, slide 11, it's most common in warm areas because the mosquitoes need the warm area to repopulate, and the parasites also need the warm area to go through development and reproduce and everything. And then it's been eradicated in some areas, and most places that have cold seasons obviously eradicate it because it'll kill the mosquitoes and the parasites. And then it's most common in sub-Saharan Africa, and also pretty common in Asia and like the Middle Americas.
So the treatments for malaria they're basically, just to preface this, they're basically all one like anti-malaria drug combined with an antibiotic drug. So the most common drug that they use to treat the 3 lesser common strands of malaria is chloroquine. So they take chloroquine and then they mix that with an antibiotic that you have to take. Chloroquine works everywhere except Papua New Guinea and Indonesia. And then P. falciparum is resistant to chloroquine, so to treat P. falciparum, they use mesofloquine, Fansidar, or quinidine. And all of those would be combined with an antibiotic to try and get rid of malaria. So then, just to continue a little bit on the prevention, you can do chemoprophylaxis, which is basically just your administered medication before you're exposed to it. It's kind of like getting a vaccine, but it's like if you're going to travel somewhere, or it's not as effective as the vaccine, but it'll protect you from getting malaria. And then personal protective measures. We all do these without even knowing. It's like when you go out on a summer's night, you normally would wear like a sweatshirt or something just because there's mosquitoes everywhere and you don't want to be bitten. So basically just wearing protective clothing, putting on bug spray or insect repellents, and then like the farmers do with their crops, just putting insecticides out. And then there is a vaccine, which it's 4 injections that you have to get over a specific span of time. And that's the prevention.
Thanks. Bye.